Welcome to the 10th installment of Teaching World History using the World History Workbook. I'm David Hertzel. Today we're looking at the Anglo Saxon Blessing of the Fields. It's a primary source in the appendix on page 174. And there's a couple of pages of introduction, one of them also on page 174, and the others on page 84 and 85. It's an ancient text from people we've heard something about already when we discussed languages. The story of English, of course, runs through Anglo-Saxon. And the Anglo-Saxon people were pre-scientific, agricultural people. And the point of this exercise is, like all of them, to do critical thinking, to read primary sources, to get some information about people of the past and the practices of the people of the past. But in this case, there's a couple of specific, well, as always, there's a couple of specific lessons. In this case, there's a lesson of particular meanings of words. We often discuss whether or not these Anglo-Saxons who are performing this blessing are worshiping the earth and what the word worshiping means. They say, "Hail to thee." What does it mean to hail? And what is the relationship between the earth and God in the blessing? There's also a question about the function of science. Why don't you see one of the questions on page 85 that students are asked to answer is that modern science functions from the premise that all physical phenomena have physical causes. What elements from the text of the blessing show the Anglo-Saxon blessing to be pre-scientific? This, I think, is a wonderful phrase, that the basic premise of modern science is that all physical phenomena have physical causes. It's very helpful. It's really an empowering principle. It helps to inform so many disagreements and to show that a lot of disagreements between issues of faith and science really are talking right past each other, because science involves the physical phenomenon and the physical causes of physical phenomenon. Faith involves something different, and faith believes that, religious faith believes that perhaps physical phenomenon don't all have physical causes. Maybe there are some other causes for physical phenomenon, like spiritual causes. And the Anglo-Saxon people were a people who held such belief. And this is why they performed this charm for the field. So the discussion really can take a number of turns before students come back to the written projects. It can look at the meaning of modern science. It can look at the application of modern science in modern agriculture, in people's lives. It can look at the intersection of faith and science, or faith and reason, in people's lives. Modern farmers, it's clear, many modern farmers around the world pray for rain and pray for crops and pray for success, and yet they also turn to science for their solutions. I think the same is true with a lot of people. People take their sick and injured family members and friends to the hospital and expect and hope for the best technical care available, and then they go downstairs to the chapel and they pray. And so somehow those things don't appear to be incompatible to many practitioners. How is that possible? What are they doing? Also, a question of the nature of the science, or the pre-science of the Anglo-Saxons, because really what they're doing is alchemy. This isn't discussed in the text, but it's lurking behind the text. There's other issues of translation, but the translation is a 19th century translation. It's reliable. It's fine. It adopts this kind of old language. Take the and so on. But it's a good translation. But there is always this question of the terms that were used, like hail and worship and God grant and so on. What do those terms mean? The second question in the project on page 85, which is Project 16, asks what specific elements or terms appear in the blessing that identify practitioners as Christian. This is simply a historical exercise. We call them Christians, but there are Christians who will say, well, they're not real Christians. I mean, there's the same issue with religious practice all around the world. You find Buddhists who will say, well, those people aren't real Buddhists, even though they're claiming to be Buddhist. But historically, we don't really look at religious practice in that way. If practitioners say they're of a particular religion, we tend to believe it. We would take their word for it. That's what you say, okay. But also there are elements within the practice. You know, the references to God as creator, references to Mass, references to altar, and so on. And all of those terms kind of add up to these people were Christian. They were also a different kind of Christian from most modern Christians. They're a Christian that was still closer to paganism and maybe closer to the earth. But I don't know if they're a lot closer to the earth than a lot of modern farmers. Even if those modern farmers are modern technological, the thing that the distance between the earth and the farmer, or nature and the farmer, is really more a function of science in both of these instances, the modern farmer and the Anglo Saxon Blessing. It's science that separates them, and this leads to question 3, which I think it's the question that I focus on the most. I always want to save time for this question because I think it's really an important question. That religious practice changes over time, and it's clear from this by comparing this blessing, this ancient blessing, to modern agricultural Christian practices, which may include blessings and may include prayer, that something very significant has changed in the practice. I don't know about in the faith. I don't know about in their love of God or their sense of theology, their sense of belief is what I want to say. But in their understanding of what the earth is, how the earth works, how life works, how plants grow, what prevents plants from growing, what causes a barren field, in all of those ways, clearly there's a dramatic change in the way that they think, that people think. And this change has to do with the perception of the universe in a scientific way. That in the modern world, all physical phenomena have physical causes. I think that most farmers would say there's a physical cause. They may say there's a spiritual cause for the physical cause, but if there's a physical cause that can be traced, that can be treated, that can be addressed, and then can produce crops. The ancient world, they were not saying this. The Anglo-Saxons weren't saying this at all. They were looking at something different. So that change is what's important to this question, and maybe the more important issue regarding this project is that religious practice changes. This is true in, I mean, think of the pilgrimage practice in Islam. Pilgrimages are dramatically different today. It's an entirely different experience. It takes today people fly into Saudi Arabia and take a train or a taxi to Mecca and to perform their pilgrimage. Millions of people do that every year. Of course, until the 20th century, that wasn't possible. And for many centuries, people walked. They would spend half of their lives maybe making this pilgrimage. There were stations along the way. There were sacred spots along the way that were traditional. They would meet people. They would interact with communities, not only commercially but also religiously. It was really a different experience altogether, and the religious authorities needed to address that. Are we going to permit people to just hop on a plane, fly to Mecca, and do their obligation, and then fly home and then be done with it? You could do it in a weekend, or we could do it in a very short period of time. Because that changes the practice so much, does that change the spirituality of it? Well, the decision made by churches and made by practices really follows the science. It follows the social practice. I think there is no stopping that pilgrimages would change with technology. There's no stopping that agriculture will change with technology. So religion is sometimes it tries to hold on to the old ways, but it's inevitable that the superior method, the more effective method, I think will always will win out in the end. But it's an excellent question, and I think worthy of a lot of good discussion. And if you don't have the opportunity for discussion, then worthy of a thoughtful answer. Question 4, I don't really pay much attention to question 4. I've used it sometimes, but I don't find it actually very, very helpful. It's very leading. It's sort of too giant. Like, you can't really compare those two things. You can compare them a little bit in the way that we did in the literature, universal literature project. But with this, it's a little bit too leading. This same subject, the commonalities within our religious tradition, I think is addressed much better at the end of this chapter with the page on mysticism. So we'll get to that next time.